The first phone call I ever made in a crisis was to my father. The last phone call he ever needed to make in his was to me. That's not a coincidence. That's a bond built over 51 years, one ordinary act of love at a time. Gerald Holloway was not a complicated man. He didn't need to be. He was the kind of father who built a backyard rink every January on the frozen grass in our yard in Duluth, Minnesota, flooded it himself with a garden hose every night until it held, who packed my lunch every morning until I was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and who sat up in his armchair every single time I came home late, not to check on me, not to punish me, but because he simply couldn't sleep until he knew I was safe. That was him. That was always him. Love wasn't something Gerald Holloway talked about. It was something he did daily, quietly, without keeping score. When my mother passed away 14 years ago, a gray Tuesday in February, the kind of day that permanently changes the color of a month, he didn't fall apart. He grieved the way he did everything else, with dignity, with his chin up. He sold his second truck to cover the funeral costs without telling me until it was already done. Kept the house running on a pension and Social Security. Still had a pot of chili on the stove every Sunday for anyone who showed up. He never once called me to say he was struggling, not once, in 14 years. So understand, when Gerald Holloway called me at 7:38 on a Tuesday morning and said his chest felt tight, I didn't hesitate. I didn't calculate. I didn't weigh my options. 51 years of that man's love doesn't produce a son who hesitates. It produces a son who moves immediately, without question, without condition. What it doesn't prepare you for is the person standing between you and the door. My name is Marcus Holloway. I'm 51 years old. I coach youth hockey on weekends, and I have been the kind of husband who confused keeping the peace with having peace. I was wrong. Took me a while, but I got there. It was a Tuesday, November 11th, 7:38 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because I was standing at the kitchen counter watching the espresso machine heat up when my phone lit up on the granite. Dad. I answered on the second ring. Marcus. His voice came out thin. Not his voice. Gerald Holloway didn't do thin. This was a man who had driven a snowplow through a Minnesota blizzard for 22 years without asking anyone for a single thing. Dad, you okay? I didn't want to bother you. There it is, 79 years old and still apologizing for existing. Talk to me, I said, already moving toward the hallway. Just tight pressure like, and my left arm keeps going numb. He paused. I'm sure it's nothing. Dad, stop, I'm coming. I hung up and stood there for exactly 3 seconds. My truck, a 2020 Ford F-150, was sitting at Bergman's Auto on Superior Street. Fuel pump issue. They'd called yesterday. Wouldn't be ready until Thursday at the earliest. Okay, think Marcus, think. Diane's car, a white Subaru Outback, sitting right there in the garage. Full tank. She'd filled it herself on Saturday. Diane was upstairs. I could hear the shower running. That long, drawn-out morning shower she took every day like she was preparing for a runway show. Diane, I called up the stairs. The shower kept running. Diane. The water stopped, a pause. What? Not what as in concern. What as in this had better be important. I need to borrow your car. My dad's having chest pains. I need to take him to St. Luke's. I'll be right back. Silence, not the kind where someone is thinking. The kind where someone has already decided and is figuring out how to say it. She appeared at the top of the stairs 30 seconds later. Hair wrapped in a towel, robe tied at the waist, face completely flat. Marcus, I can't today. Diane, my dad's having chest pains. His left arm. I heard you. She leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms. Call an ambulance. He doesn't trust ambulances. He had a bad experience when. Then call someone else. She was already turning back toward the bedroom. I have a client lunch downtown today and a full morning before that. I'm not going to spend my whole day sitting in a hospital waiting room. I stood completely still. Diane, my voice came out quieter than I expected. His left arm is going numb. She stopped, turned halfway, looked at me with an expression I will never forget for the rest of my life. Not concern, not guilt, inconvenience. He's your father, Marcus, not mine. A pause, figure it out. She went back into the bedroom. The door didn't slam. That almost made it worse. A slam would have meant emotion. She just closed it gently, like she'd told me we were out of orange juice. Like a 79-year-old man's left arm going numb was a minor scheduling conflict she didn't have room for. I stood there for a moment, just a moment. Then I pulled out my phone. Ray Kowalczyk lived 3 houses down. Retired ironworker, 68 years old. Drove a well-kept Chevy Silverado he treated like it was made of glass. He was the kind of man who still brought soup to the neighbors when someone got sick. He and my father had known each other for over 25 years. He'd been a pallbearer at my mother's funeral. He picked up on the first ring. "Marcus, everything all right?" "Ray, I need a favor. My dad's having chest pains. My truck's in the shop and Diane's car isn't available. Can you drive us to St. Luke's?" Not even a pause. "Give me 5 minutes, I'll be out front." That was it, no negotiation, no calendar to check, no client lunch to protect. 5 minutes. I called my father back immediately. "I'm coming, Dad. Ray's driving, you don't need to do anything. Just unlock the back door and sit down. You hear me? Sit down." "Marcus, you really don't have to make a fuss." "Dad." "Yes." "Sit down." A small sound, almost a laugh. "Okay, son." Ray pulled up in 4 minutes and 50 seconds. I counted. The drive to St. Luke's Medical Center on London Road took 11 minutes. Dad sat in the back with me, his big weathered hand folded inside both of mine, wearing his good flannel jacket like he was going somewhere important. Because he was. He kept apologizing the whole way there. "Sorry to pull you out, Ray. I'm sure it's nothing serious." "Don't give it a thought, Jerry. I was just watching the morning news anyway." "Anything worth watching never is anymore." Dad laughed, actually laughed, and I looked out at the Duluth morning, Lake Superior flat and dark in the distance, and I felt 2 things at the exact same time. Gratitude for Ray and something else, something cold and very quiet, for Diane. I didn't examine it yet. I just let it sit there. St. Luke's was busy for a Tuesday morning. We checked in at the ER at 8:21. A nurse named Tamara, no nonsense, efficient, the kind of woman who'd seen everything twice, got Dad into a room within 20 minutes. The doctor on call was a compact woman named Dr. Sylvia Marsh. Calm voice, deliberate hands. She didn't rush. "Mr. Holloway, I want to run an EKG and check your enzyme levels. The symptoms you're describing, we take seriously at your age." Dad looked at me. His eyes were asking me if he should be scared. "Do whatever she says, Dad," I told him. He nodded. Then he reached up and put his hand on my arm. "You came," he said simply, like he hadn't been completely sure I would. That nearly broke me right there in that examination room. "Dad, I'll always come." He squeezed my arm twice, leaned back against the pillow, and closed his eyes. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 55 minutes. Plastic chairs, buzzing overhead lights, a TV bolted to the wall playing a home renovation show on low volume. I drank the worst coffee of my life from a vending machine near the stairwell and didn't taste a single sip. Diane didn't text once, not even, "Is he okay?" At 11:26, Dr. Marsh came out to find me. Her face was measured, not alarmed but serious. "Mr. Holloway, your father had what we call a mild cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but his body was sending a warning. We want to keep him for observation, run additional tests, and review his medications. But he's stable." "He's stable." "He's stable. He's also asking whether there's a hockey game on anywhere in the building." I laughed, actually laughed. That's him. Can I go see him? Give us about 20 minutes to get him settled. I sat back down, elbows on knees, stared at the linoleum floor. Figure it out, Diane had said. Figure it out. While she went to her client lunch downtown, while her father-in-law's heart was sending distress signals. I figured it out all right. I pulled out my phone and called Ray, who had waited in the parking lot the entire time, as I knew he would. He's stable, I told him. Thank God, Ray said, and he meant every syllable. Ray. Thank you. Marcus. His voice was gentle and firm at the same time. That's what people do. I let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. Some people. I stayed with Dad until 4:15. We watched half a hockey rerun together, and he beat me 3 times at a trivia game he made up involving state capitals and NHL teams. He was sharper than me on his worst day. Always had been. At 3:52, just before I left, he took my hand again. Marcus, his voice had shifted. The thin morning voice was long gone. This was his other voice, the one he used when he meant something. Yeah, Dad. Diane didn't come. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer right away. She had a lunch meeting. Just my name. That was all he needed to say. I looked at him, 79 years old. Flannel jacket folded neatly on the chair beside him, eyes as clear as they'd ever been. She went to lunch, Dad, I said quietly, downtown with a client. The words landed in that hospital room like something dropped from a great height. Dad didn't gasp, didn't raise his voice, didn't say a single word about Diane Holloway. He just nodded slowly, looked toward the window. The November light over Lake Superior was turning silver and heavy. He didn't say anything else, but I saw something move across his face, something that looked a lot like a decision. I kissed his forehead at 4:17. I walked out of St. Luke's into the cold Duluth air. Ray was waiting. We drove home in comfortable silence. And somewhere on Skyline Parkway, with the birch trees bare and the lake gray below us, I realized I wasn't angry at Diane. I was done. Wednesday, November 12th, 6:54 in the morning. I woke up before the alarm. That's how you know something's sitting on your chest that sleep couldn't move. I lay there on my side of the bed, the right side, always the right, and stared at the ceiling. Diane was still asleep, breathing slow and even, completely unbothered. The woman could sleep through a verdict. I got up quietly, went downstairs, made coffee. Yes, with the loud grinder. No, I didn't feel bad about it. Not even slightly. She'd chosen a lunch meeting over my father's left arm going numb. She could survive the coffee grinder. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the lake through the window over the sink, flat and dark in the November morning. My phone was face down on the table. I flipped it over. No messages from St. Luke's. Good. I thought about Dad, about the way he'd looked in that hospital bed, smaller than I'd ever seen him, but still so completely himself. About the way he touched my arm and said, "You came," like he hadn't been entirely sure I would. He always came for me, every single time, without question, without condition. The very least I could do was come for him. I was on my second cup when I heard Diane on the stairs. She came into the kitchen in her robe, glanced at me, then at the coffee maker. "You made coffee." Every morning for 9 years, still surprising. She poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter. A beat of silence. The specific kind that married people know, the kind waiting for someone to bring something up. She finally brought it up. "How's Gerald?" Gerald, not your dad, not Dad, Gerald, like he was a neighbor whose name she vaguely remembered. "Stable," I said. "Mild cardiac event. They're keeping him another day." She repeated it slowly. "Mild cardiac event." Another silence. "How was the hospital?" "How was lunch?" I asked. She blinked just once. I caught it. "It was fine," she said carefully. "Marcus, I want you to know yesterday was genuinely complicated for me." Complicated. I let the word sit there between us for a moment. Your father-in-law's heart was sending distress signals and you were at a restaurant, but sure. Complicated. I'm not doing this right now, I said. I stood up, rinsed my mug. I'm just trying to explain. I know, I heard you the first time, yesterday at the top of the stairs. I picked up my phone, my jacket, my keys, the spare set, since my truck was still at Bergman's, and I walked to the door. Where are you going? She asked. To see my father. I didn't look back. Ray drove me again without being asked. One hand on the wheel, Merle Haggard playing low on the radio. There's a specific kind of friendship that doesn't need words to function. Ray and I had that. We parked at St. Luke's at 9:05. I'll be here, he said. Ray, man, you really don't have to. Marcus, he looked at me over the top of his glasses. I'll be here. Some people show up, take note of who they are, write it somewhere permanent. Dad was sitting up when I got to his room, color back in his face. Wearing his own flannel shirt, he'd refused the hospital gown after the first night, which I respected deeply, with his reading glasses on and a Sudoku book open in his lap. 6 letters, he said the second I walked in. Someone who abandons you. I stopped in the doorway and stared at him. He looked up over his glasses with the most perfectly straight face I had ever seen on a human being. For the puzzle, Marcus. I laughed so hard the nurse looked in from the hallway. Lever, I said, dropping into the chair beside him. Leaver. He counted the boxes, wrote it in, nodded with deep satisfaction. You always were the sharp one. I'm your only child, Dad. And still the sharp one. We sat like that for a while. Easy, quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who have loved each other long enough to not need to fill every silence. He finished a few more puzzles. I drank the terrible hospital coffee and didn't complain, because sitting in that room with him, even in a hard plastic chair, even drinking something that tasted like burnt regret, was exactly where I wanted to be. Then he closed the book, set it on the bedside table, folded his hands in his lap. I want to call Patricia this morning, he said. Patricia Vance. Miss Patricia Vance, attorney at law, St. Louis County, 28 years in practice. She'd handled my mother's estate. She'd drawn up Dad's will 7 years ago. Sharp, precise, the kind of lawyer who listened twice as much as she talked. I kept my voice careful. Okay. I've been thinking, he said, since last night. Dad, you don't have to. Marcus Allen Holloway, full name, all 3. I hadn't heard all 3 since I was 16 and put a hockey puck through the garage window. Do not finish that sentence. I closed my mouth. He looked at me with those clear, steady eyes. The November light was coming through the window, softer this morning. It made him look exactly like himself, exactly like the man who had built a backyard rink every winter, who had shown up to every school event, who had driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu in my first apartment. I've worked my whole life, he said quietly. Your mother and I, we went without things so that what we built would mean something, so it would go somewhere that mattered. A pause. To people who showed up. I didn't say a word. Diane didn't show up, Marcus. He looked at me steadily. Not just yesterday. Not when your mother passed and I needed help sorting through the house. Not when I had the knee surgery 3 years ago and needed rides to physical therapy. Not at Christmas 2 years ago when I had the flu and you had to leave dinner early to check on me. He looked at me. And not yesterday when my heart was failing. She went to lunch. Every single example landed like a stone in still water. Because he was right. He had always been right, and I had been making excuses for years. I'm not angry, he said, and the remarkable thing was he wasn't. His voice was completely calm, completely steady. I'm just accurate. He reached for his phone on the bedside table, found a small folded piece of paper tucked inside his glasses case, a phone number written in his handwriting, Patricia Vance, direct line. He'd come prepared. My father didn't make impulsive decisions. This had been building longer than one hospital stay. "Do you want me to step out?" I asked. He thought about it for a moment. Then, "No, stay." Stay, one word, and everything in me went still and grateful. He dialed at 9:31. She picked up on the second ring. "Patricia Vance." "Patricia, it's Gerald Holloway. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Mr. Holloway," her voice warmed immediately. "Never, how are you?" "I'm in the hospital, actually. St. Luke's here in Duluth." A brief pause. "I'm sorry to hear that. Serious." "Serious enough to make me think clearly," he said. Even in that moment, calling his lawyer from a hospital bed the morning after a cardiac event, there was dignity in his voice. The kind that can't be performed. The kind built over 79 years of doing the right thing, even when it costs something. "Patricia, I need to update my will. Some very specific changes." Silence on her end, professional silence, absorbing. "Not stalling." "Of course, do you want me to come to you?" "Please, today if possible." "I can be there by 1:30. "Perfect," he glanced at me. "My son will be here." "Very good, Mr. Holloway. I'll see you then." He hung up, set the phone down, picked up his Sudoku book, just like that, like he hadn't just changed everything, like he hadn't just loved me in the most powerful, permanent way a father could. I sat there for a moment, throat tight. "Dad." "You don't have to say anything," he said, without looking up from the puzzle. "And I'm not doing this for you, Marcus. I'm doing it because I've spent 50 years building something that deserves to go somewhere it matters, and I've decided where that is." He looked up over his glasses. "Any other questions?" I had about 35. I asked 0. "No, sir." "Good. Now go find me something edible from the cafeteria. Whatever they've been serving me smells like something they regretted making." And for just a second, just one, I looked at him. This tall, quiet, magnificent man in his flannel shirt in a Duluth hospital room, doing a Sudoku puzzle like the world owed him nothing and he owed it everything. And I thought, I have spent 51 years trying to be worthy of him. I hope I'm getting there. Patricia Vance arrived at 1:27. Dark blazer, slim briefcase, silver earrings. She shook my hand firmly, nodded at me the way lawyers do when they understand the weight of rooms, and sat across from my father with a yellow legal pad and a fountain pen. I sat in the corner, quiet still, a witness. The meeting lasted 42 minutes. I won't put every word down here. Some things deserve their privacy. But I'll tell you this. By the time Patricia Vance clicked her pen and slid the legal pad back into her briefcase, the document that Diane Holloway had been silently counting on through 9 years of marriage had been fundamentally, irrevocably, and legally rewritten. The house on Ridgewood Drive, owned outright since 2011, Marcus. The investment accounts my mother and father had spent 32 years building, Marcus. The woodworking tools, the furniture, the 1972 Chevy C10 pickup my father had spent 3 years restoring by hand, the truck that still smelled like grease and sawdust when you opened the garage door, the truck that smelled like him, Marcus. And $15,000 earmarked specifically for the Lake Superior Humane Society on West Arrowhead Road, because Gerald Holloway had volunteered there every other Saturday for 9 years, because that's the kind of man he was. Diane's name appeared exactly 0 times. "Not my problem," someone had once said. Turns out correct. When Patricia stood to leave, she shook my hand again at the door. "Your father," she said quietly, glancing back at him across the room, already back to his Sudoku, already completely unbothered, already entirely himself, is one of the most clear-headed people I've worked with in 28 years of practice. I looked at him too. "Yeah," I said, "I know, I've always known." I left the hospital at 5:00. Ray swung by to take me home. I got in, closed the door. He looked at me the way old friends do, not searching for information, just checking that you're still standing. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Everything is exactly the way it should be." He nodded, put it in drive. My phone was in my pocket, silent. Diane hadn't called once all day. She had no idea, absolutely no idea, but she would. Thursday, November 13th, 8:06 in the morning. I was at Bergman's Auto on Superior Street picking up my truck when it started. New fuel pump, fresh oil change, and a set of wiper blades Don Bergman threw in because our kids had played hockey on the same travel team, and that's just what neighbors did. I was at the counter signing the invoice when my phone buzzed. "Diane." I let it ring, not out of strategy, not yet. I just didn't have anything to say that would land the way it needed to. Not yet. I slid the phone back into my jacket, shook Don's hand, and walked out into the Duluth morning. Air sharp and cold and completely honest. Started the engine, watched my breath fog the windshield, and thought about Dad. About bringing him home to Ridgewood Drive where he belonged. About getting him settled in his kitchen with his coffee and his Sudoku and his dignity fully intact. That was what today was about. Not Diane, not the calls, not any of it. Today was about bringing my father home. My phone buzzed again. Diane, then a third time, a fourth, a fifth. Something had shifted. I pulled out of Bergman's and headed toward St. Luke's. He was ready when I got there. 8:47. Flannel jacket on, small bag packed neatly. Tamara the nurse walking beside him, another nurse pushing the mandatory wheelchair. Hospital policy, non-negotiable. Dad had already argued and lost with characteristic grace. He stood up from the wheelchair. The second he cleared the automatic doors. "I can walk to my son's truck," he announced to no one in particular and everyone within earshot. "I had a cardiac event, not a personality transplant." Tamara laughed, the real kind. She took his hand in both of hers and held it for a moment. "You take care of yourself, Mr. Holloway." "Always do, sweetheart." He squeezed her hand. "You're good at what you do. Don't let the long shifts tell you otherwise." She pressed her lips together, nodded, stepped back. Even on his way out of a hospital after a cardiac event, my father left people better than he found them. I held the passenger door open. He climbed in slowly, carefully, but independently, which mattered more to him than any medication, any instruction, any doctor's order. His independence was the last thing he'd surrender, and we both knew it. I closed the door, walked around, got in. He looked at my phone in the cup holder, lighting up every 30 seconds. "Diane, Diane, Diane." 11 missed calls before 9 in the morning. Dad said nothing, just put on his seatbelt and looked faintly out the window, like someone who had made a decision and was completely at peace with it. I got him home to Ridgewood Drive first. The brown and cream split level sat quiet and familiar at the end of the block. The house where I'd learned to skate on the driveway after Dad flooded it, where I'd done homework at the kitchen table, where my mother had planted the lilac bushes along the fence that still bloomed every May. The front walk was swept clean. The welcome mat said home in letters so worn out neither of us had noticed them in years, but I noticed them today. I got him inside, made his coffee the specific way, 2 scoops of dark roast, 4 minutes steep in the French press because he'd showed me once and I never forgot. Checked the thermostat. Went through the medications from Dr. Marsh one by one, reading the labels out loud while he sat at the kitchen table with his hands around his mug and listened. "Marcus." I looked up. He was watching me from across the table where he'd helped me with geometry, where he'd carved a Thanksgiving turkey every year for 30 years, where he'd sat the morning after my mother died and held my hand without saying a single word. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He reached across the table and covered my hand with both of his. His hands were large, rough, warm. The hands that had built a backyard rink and tied my skates and waved from the bleachers and held mine in the backseat of Ray's truck on the way to that same hospital 2 days ago. These hands had been showing up for me for 51 years. "I need you to hear me," he said. "I'm listening. What I did with the will, I didn't do it to punish Diane." His eyes were steady, clear, no bitterness in them. Just truth, the way he always delivered it, plain and quiet and completely unmovable. "I did it because it was right. Because your mother and I built something together, and it belongs with someone who understands what building something together actually means." He squeezed my hand once. "You understand that?" I did. I understood it in my bones. "And Marcus," his voice dropped slightly, not softer, more deliberate, "I need you to think about your life, not about the money, not about any of this." He gestured at nothing, at everything. "About whether you are happy, about whether you are loved the way you deserve to be." He looked at me for a long moment. "Because you have been showing up alone for a very long time, son. And a man like you, a man who shows up, deserves someone standing next to him when he does." The kitchen was completely still. Outside on Ridgewood Drive a car passed slowly. The refrigerator hummed. The birch tree in the backyard moved in the November wind. Everything he said was true, every single word. My throat tightened. My eyes stung slightly at the corners. I didn't look away from him. "Yeah," I said, and my voice came out rough and quiet and completely honest. "I know, Dad." He nodded once, slowly, like that was exactly what he needed to hear. "Good." He picked up his coffee, took a sip. "Now are you going to answer that phone or not?" My phone was buzzing on the table between us. "Diane, call number 27. I looked at it, looked at him. He raised one eyebrow. I picked the phone up, turned it face down, let it buzz against the wood until it stopped. "Not yet," I said. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "Not yet," he repeated quietly, like he was tasting the patience in it, approving of it. "I'll check on you tonight," I told him, "and tomorrow morning, and every morning after that." He waved a hand. "I know you will." "I mean it, Dad." "Marcus," he looked at me over his glasses. He'd put them back on without me noticing. "I know you mean it. You have always meant it." I left Ridgewood Drive at 1:20, drove home, parked behind Diane's Subaru, sat in my truck for a full minute. 31 missed calls. I went inside. Diane was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch in her work clothes, both hands wrapped around her phone like it was the only solid thing she had left. She looked up the second I walked through the door. Her eyes were raw. The careful composure she wore like a second skin had cracked, and underneath it was something that looked a lot like a woman who had spent all day realizing exactly what she'd done. "Good," said something quiet in the back of my mind. "Stay there a while." "Marcus," she stood immediately, "I've been calling you all day." "I know," I said. I set my keys on the hook by the door, and I thought about Tuesday morning. About my dad lying in that hospital bed with monitors on his chest and an IV in his arm. About the EKG. About Dr. Marsh's measured face telling me his body had been warning him. And about Diane's client lunch downtown. About the bread basket getting passed while my father's heart stuttered in the dark. I let that sit in my chest for exactly 1 second. Then I looked at my wife. "Did you know?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "About the will, did you know she was going to?" "No," I said. "I found out the same way you did." She pressed her fingers to her mouth, composed herself. When she spoke again, it was quieter, more controlled, but underneath every word, threaded through like a wire pulled too tight, was fear. Real fear. The kind that arrives when consequences finally catch up to choices. Patricia Vance's office called to confirm the changes were filed, and "Marcus, do you understand what that means? Everything we've been expecting." "Diane," my voice was calm, steadier than I'd heard it in years. "I understand exactly what it means." "Then talk to him. Ask him to reconsider. Tell him it was a misunderstanding, that I was going to come to the hospital. You just what?" She stopped. I took one step toward her, not aggressive, not angry, just present, quietly present in a way I hadn't been in years, because I finally had nothing left to protect. "You just had a client lunch downtown," I said, while my father was in a hospital bed with a cardiac event, while I was sitting in a plastic chair in a waiting room drinking vending machine coffee under fluorescent lights. I paused. While Ray Kowalczyk sat in a parking lot for 3 hours, because that's what people do. The color left her face slowly, completely. "My father made his decision," I said, "the same way you made yours, clearly, deliberately, and without asking anyone's permission. Marcus, please." "He has spent 79 years showing up." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "For my mother, for me, for every single person he's ever loved. He has never once, not once, chosen his own comfort over somebody who needed him." I looked at Diane for a long moment. He just finally stopped expecting everyone else to do the same. The living room was completely silent. Diane looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in years, and I watched something move across her face. Not just fear, something deeper than fear. The specific expression of a person who has fully understood the size of what they've lost. Not the money, not the will. Me. She finally understood she had lost me. And the man standing in front of her, calm, clear-eyed, keys in hand, heart finally at peace, was not the man who had stood at the bottom of the stairs on Tuesday morning still hopping she'd say yes. That man was gone. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at it, my father's name on the screen. She looked up at me, eyes wide, something that might have been hope. I looked back at her for exactly 1 second, and felt it, the last thread of something I'd been holding for 9 years finally going slack, not with anger, with something quieter, with release. I picked up my keys from the hook. "I'm going to check on my father," I said. I opened the front door. The Duluth air hit me, cold, clean, honest, and completely free. "Oh," I said, turning back one final time. Diane stood in the middle of the living room, phone in hand, my father's name glowing on the screen, 35 calls worth of consequence written into every line of her face. I looked at her for exactly 1 second and felt nothing but clarity. "You should probably answer that." I closed the door behind me and exhaled. The kind of exhale that comes from somewhere, so deep you didn't know you'd been holding it. I stood on that porch for just a moment. The November air hit my face, cold and clean and honest, and something settled over me that I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Not anger, not bitterness, not the hot rush of a man who finally had enough. Just clarity, the quiet, unmistakable clarity of a man who had finally, after years of telling himself things were fine, after years of smoothing things over and swallowing things down and sleeping on the right side of a bed, leaving room for someone who never moved toward him, finally seen his life exactly as it was. I had not been married for 9 years. I had been enduring for 9 years. There is a difference. And standing on that porch, with my father's voice still in my ears and Diane's face still in my mind, I finally understood it completely. The hospital didn't make me see it. Gerald Holloway lying in a hospital bed with a cardiac event while his daughter-in-law passed the bread basket at a client lunch, that didn't plant a seed. It burned the whole field down and showed me exactly what had always been growing there. I walked to my truck, started the engine. The radio came on low, something old, something my father used to hum on Saturday mornings in the garage while he worked on that old Chevy, and I let it play. I didn't make any decisions that night, beyond one. I was not going back into that house, not that night. And somewhere, in the place where a man knows things before he's ready to say them out loud, I knew it wasn't just that night. Loyalty and love deserve a legacy, and I had finally found my way back to both.